Yeah, so today's the first in our series of what we're calling kitchen table chats, and I have to thank my friend Gabe Shippy for putting this idea on my radar. And so the first one's going to be with him. I think we're going to pick up from a conversation we had the other day. So.
It'll work. And we're all going virtual right now. We're doing what we have to do because door-to-door engagement is not, unfortunately, not an option right now, but this is, I think, a good alternative. So we can still engage people and talk about the issues, address concerns and questions without being door-to-door. So hopefully you get people to tune in and kind of take advantage of that opportunity while we have time to do this. So
absolutely.
As constituents of the 6th District, or your future constituents, we're very appreciative of you doing that.
Well, I'm really appreciative that we live in a world where, despite these weird times, we still manage to connect somehow across space-time. It's pretty fantastic. Yeah. So you had some. If anybody at any point has questions or thoughts they want to ask or share, then please chime in with those in the comments. But for now, I think Gabe and I can just pick up on the existential conversation you were excited to have with me yesterday. So.
Yeah, I was excited. And the good thing about this too is even folks who are maybe tuning in right this second can go back and watch it later. So
totally.
Still opportunity to at least hear you out, if not engage in real time. So Jesse, running for District 6, Athens-Clarke County Commission. Obviously, in less than an hour, they've got a really big meeting tonight, dealing with the public safety and health concerns that are on everyone's mind. And I just kind of want to hear, as a voter and a resident of this community, especially living in your district, I kind of want to hear your take on this. More broadly, how you feel about the way that the county commission is currently handling it. Would you handle it any differently from your one seat on the commission? Just kind of give us an overview of where you're at, because obviously it's a very fluid situation, and things are changing on a daily basis, so no one can quite tell what's happening from one day to the next. We're very reactive right now. I think there's a lot of opportunities to be proactive, right? And I kind of want to hear your take on that. As you're, asking for this opportunity to serve on that commission in a few months.
Yeah. So my take on, I guess I'll start with what they've already done. I was pretty encouraged with how that meeting resolved earlier this week. I was pretty worried with how it started when they were talking about a curfew. I understand that they were angling at doing something that I think is necessary, but I don't think that was the right way to do it. And what we ended up with was essentially this voluntary, not station in place. What's the, I'm mixing up all these new terms that have become shelter in place. Yeah. The voluntary shelter in place policy that ended up being worded more like a recommendation. And, as Melissa kept saying, it's not a nocturnal virus, so it was 24 hours. And a lot of times when I think about the society I envision us having, it's a society that's more full of recommendations rather than rules. And of course, as things get more heated, I think people are going to be more inclined to get towards mandates and rules. And if we move in that direction, which may become necessary, I know a lot of people want to see us go that direction. I think it's important that we think of how those rules are enforced, what that enforcement looks like, and who we're asking to do that enforcing, and also who we think it's going to have to be enforced upon. And when it comes to emergency, we're in this state of emergency. I think we need to remember that the people who are most likely to be in violation of some kind of mandate are the most vulnerable people, and those might be folks who are currently don't have a place to go. You can't go home if you don't have a building that the city recognizes as a home to go to. And we know, of course, there's inadequate beds and stuff in shelters in town. So part of this is on our community, and this is a problem that exists before this emergency, but is in a way a crisis that's been ongoing that we've just gotten used to for years. Our community providing space and infrastructure for people who don't have the economic means to live in a building. And what we have right now, I hesitate to call crises like this opportunities. That can sound kind of gross, but I think we have an opportunity to actually address holistically and as a community with a lot of solidarity some of these issues that have been ignored or at least not prioritized as much as they need to. So whatever we can scramble to do to give people a place to go right now can hopefully be the precursor for having better infrastructure moving forward. And when it comes to the waivers on things like evictions, I'm really proud of the mayor and commission for putting a 60-day moratorium on evictions. I think that opens the door for us thinking about eviction reform more broadly, and if and when people should be evicted. I probably tend to be on the side of somewhere between very few and no evictions on people, but certainly the way that process unfolds, I think, has a lot of room for reform. So the policies we're seeing discussed right now, I think, can actually lay the groundwork for that if we choose to take a long-term vision to how we write policies in response to this crisis.
Yeah.
I know that I just wrote, if anybody's interested, the Mayor and Commission is voting tonight on 2 things. They're updating it's agenda item number 2 is an update to their emergency, or the county's, our emergency response provisions. And the current provisions that we have are quite a bit less developed than what they're proposing, and I didn't really have a chance to fine-tooth comb it because I was just trying to read through it last night and then again today, and I talked with a couple of folks on the commission about it. But there were a couple things that stuck out to me as potentially very problematic when we get into that idea of enforcement and what it looks like to have emergency powers, and how people who are found in violation will be held subject to fines or arrest and things. Now, I'm not saying this like sound the alarms and necessarily scare folks in the immediate, because the 3rd agenda item is the one about what they're trying to do right now, and in that they're explicitly trying to set things up so that people don't get arrested or fined, that there really isn't that kind of process in place. So here's where we kind of get to the bigger vision question, right? Like, we pass these policies in the immediate that allow for what Melissa Link was calling local martial law, and they might not be used that way right now, but how might they be used in the future, or how might they be used in a couple weeks if things get more chaotic and people aren't quote unquote complying? And so that's where I think when we look at what they're passing right now, we also need more specific language in writing about what the police department is expected to do, how they're expected to approach these interactions with people, and what they do with people who aren't in compliance. And part of that is not just about how they approach it, but also what resources we provide them, what place we give them to bring people. And this all ties into the part of my platform that's about treating police as social work. So if we rethink policing as social work, and instead of people arriving with guns with an incentive to arrest or instruction to issue a citation, we're instead giving them instructions on how to get people access to the resources they need in an urgent or crisis situation. Right now, we're all kind of in a collective crisis, but there's a collective, low-key crisis that's happening all the time in our society when we think of wealth inequality and homelessness and addiction and things like that. And so those things, I think, need to be addressed holistically, and we have an opportunity to do that now. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place, but the summary is, for the specific things about tonight, if you live in Athens, you can comment on the agenda. Their meeting starts at 6 o'clock. You can read what I wrote. I shared it on my page and on the election, the Jesse for Athens page. And there's plenty more to comment on as well, not just the things that I chose to highlight.
Great. Hey, while we've got a quick pause, I just want to check and see, are there any questions popping up in the feed at this point?
I'm seeing some people who like a lot of what we're talking about. But,
okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's reassuring, I suppose.
Yeah.
No questions. So let me get into another specific about this situation as it is now. As you know, our governor, Brian Kemp, He's been one of the few governors in the country at this point, is my understanding, that has not implemented like a pretty much a counters non-essential businesses all across Georgia, like the way they have in New York and other places. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that that idea or that action in particular is very difficult, because you're balancing, the livelihoods of a lot of folks who are in the service industry or hospitality or what have you, who are essentially being told, because as of right now, the federal government has not passed any kind of major aid relief or UBI or anything like that. So they're being told, like, we know you can't make any money, but this place just can't be open because it's a public safety risk. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on, in particular, on, I know you're running for county commission, you're not running for statewide office, but on that, maybe not decision, but lack of decision from the governor to implement that, and how that pertains to Clarke County, which I actually think is particularly vulnerable, just because we have so many people who live here who are part of the service industry. So I'd like to hear you kind of touch on that issue.
Yeah. My understanding is that it's a little legally ambiguous whether they can shut businesses down, which is part of why maybe that hasn't happened yet here. Again, I guess I'd go back to the idea of a society of recommendations rather than rules. I think most people don't want to spread disease around. I think most people understand that, even though folks who are the age you and I are, Gabe, and that it will basically just be like a bad cold at worst, or like a flu, at worst, but that we're very likely to survive. That if too many people get it at once, we overwhelm infrastructure. Or if older folks get it, they seem to be more likely to be severely affected or to die. And certainly if a massive amount of people get sick all at once. So I think, when it comes to how to lead, it's, well, do we want to just crack down and force people to behave a certain way? Or do we want to empower people with the knowledge of why this matters, and then more importantly, the resources to do something different? So, resolutions are easy things to pass that indicate the direction you want to go without committing resources, right? Most of the most promising things we've seen on the local level in the past year have actually been in the form of resolution rather than ordinance, whether it's 100% Athens or the pro-immigration resolution, things like that. So I would think that a great resolution to pass while we're talking about this emergency response is something that says that we are going to look out for the most vulnerable people, that we do recognize, that, like, whereas a large portion of the population of this community, Athens-Clarke County, work service industry jobs. They work jobs in precarity, that many people rely on cash jobs that are going to be hard to prove if the federal or state government does issue some kind of funding to people. If that's distributed based on what people's work history is, you have to be able to prove that you're working. If you're working as a door person at a venue for cash, you're not going to be able to prove that. And certainly for the large number of undocumented folks in this community, you're not going to be able to prove that. So again, short term and the immediate, I think we need to be holding the most vulnerable people center in every decision we make, and working not only for those folks, but with those folks to find solutions. What would work for people in those situations is best defined by the people in those situations. And unfortunately, we don't see enough members of our local government really representing working class people. Certainly no one undocumented is on, or even could be on, the county government as it's currently set up.
Which is unfortunate.
But then longer term, I think this really reveals yet again that we need to be building society and an economy that functions very differently, and that functions in service of the people who are most vulnerable, that reduces that inequality and mitigates that precarity, so that people who are currently vulnerable to situations like this are not only less vulnerable in the future to a crisis, but are also just living a less vulnerable life day to day. Does that feel like a legit answer to your question? Or?
That was a very legit answer, and I appreciate that because you kind of cover a variety of aspects that all play into this issue. And I think, too, in the way I sympathize with our mayor, commission, and other local elected officials, just because, we can only do so much as a community, as a local government. A lot of this stuff comes down from the state or comes down to federal and how they act, and then the local level governments kind of deal with the residual effects of that and work with the resources that they have in place. So they're in a tough position as well. But from what I've seen, I think they've acted as swiftly as they can, considering how quickly circumstances have moved in regards to all this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally just 9 days ago, I remember we were at a gathering at downtown, for the Bernie Sanders people. And, like 3 days after that, I feel like you got a sense that things are really unraveling, so that's how fast this has all moved.
Yeah, this brings to mind for me, and I'm seeing the question from Adam, what do you envision for an ACC-led public awareness campaign to get the word out to Athens residents about whatever new guidelines and mandates ACC passes in response to coronavirus? I guess it's actually from Brianna, maybe. And then, to what degree should we be working with surrounding counties on preventative measures and interventions, and how? So kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, Gabe, and I think this sort of responds to that also. Like a week ago, I was one of those people who wasn't taking this very seriously the same way I am now, in part because it seemed like it was mostly fear-mongering that would make someone want to take this serious. And so it's hard to sort of decipher, like, how much are we freaking out because there's a barrage of media that sort of preys upon people's tendency to freak out, because it's easy to freak out. And so I was kind of like jokingly being like, oh, Corona bump, and then I'd hug people. I'm glad there's this website I was following that gave daily updates. They still are. Ars Technica, ARS Technica, has what I think is like a really well-worded, clear, concise, level-headed, if you will, overview of what's going on globally, what we know. When people use statistics and terms right now, what do they mean by those? We're all getting used to terms that, like social distancing and shelter in place, that I think almost none of us thought of until very recently. And their tone shifted from saying, well, kind of go about your day like just wash your hands, to you should take social distancing measures. This is what we mean by that. And then I began to kind of understand that this isn't about fear of this disease killing me or killing lots of people I know by virtue of being a deadly disease. It's the way that it can overwhelm infrastructure. And I think there's a tendency, we're emotional creatures made up of like meat and energy, and we tend to see a crisis or something that's important to us, and we respond emotionally. And for a lot of people, that's going to put first the thing that seems most dire. So a lot of the information that's most being spread around is encouraging people to take this seriously because it is deadly or because it is a crisis. Just saying crisis, crisis, crisis. So when I think of the kind of information we should be spreading, I think it should be kind of a level-headed, like, really just like solidarity measures. Like, this is what mutual aid looks like in a community. Like, we are, if it wasn't clear before, like, we are interconnected on a planetary level in a way that this species has never experienced before. And, a virus being able to spread around the whole planet this quickly reveals something about how close we all are with billions of people we don't personally know. And our ability to survive it and get through it fairly smoothly, hopefully, is reliant upon our ability to work together as communities, to be compassionate with each other and with the people that we don't know. And what that means is to do this social distancing thing, and here's why. I think emphasizing, health and compassion and connectedness as like how we center getting the word out about this. Would in my opinion be a more effective approach, I think, than the fear-based approach, because it's easy and I think logical to be suspicious of a fear-based approach. And so then to kind of answer Adam and Brianna's question about how to get the word out, I think logistically we have departments like the water services department that's already getting to most everyone in the county, and I think we circulate a newsletter like they do monthly with your bill anyway, and that talks about how to respond and what it means to look out for each other, to keep each other safe, why sheltering in place is necessary, how to go about that, and then when we think about what's being discussed at tonight's mayor and commission meeting, taking that same approach to how we write these laws, that it's not about like mandating people so that they're not out of compliance with something that's dangerous and harmful. It's more about like helping people understand why this is important, and then ensuring that they have the tools to conduct themselves in alignment with that importance. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I've got a phone going off over here. Well, I handle that. I'm going to go on mute so everyone doesn't hear that. But we'll let you answer any more questions later on.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions right now. Do you have comments on there, Megan? Okay. Could you share one? Megan Westbrook is also in my house in the other room. I don't see those questions from my screen. Could you share one with me? Okay. Okay, yeah, if people have questions or comments and you want to ask them, please share them. You can do that on the page on the Jesse for Athens post, or ideally in this chat if you're watching. It's the easiest because then I can see it while I'm talking to you. But now that you've handled your phone call crisis, Gabe, do you want to pick up where you left off? Oh, Gabe, I can't hear you. I love that we're navigating technical difficulties this whole time. It's funny. Oh, are you there, Gabe?
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. Cool. Where did you leave off before the phone rang? I forgot what you were talking about.
Yeah, well, I think you started to touch on something that I was hoping that you would kind of jump to ahead, which is just, we get beyond the policy and the specifics of how you handle this as commissioner, how they're already handling it, and what this just means collectively for humanity. And kind of I know that it can run the risk of maybe coming across as like, another word is used a lot, but privilege, if you start sounding too optimistic, right? But I agree with you a lot in the sense that I think within this crisis there's a lot of opportunity, and we're seeing that across the board. We're looking at the way we function and the way our economy works, and we're seeing how like literally you can lose 1 week of work, and that's enough to potentially get evicted from your home or lose your vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's this other aspect of it too, which is the environmental. We're seeing how much of like our daily lives and our economy is actually, that may lead to economic expansion, is actually detrimental to the environment. And I think there's been these examples of that have been pointed out in the national media, just how the smog levels in China have decreased so much that they can even see it from the satellites that NASA is looking at, and like the water in Italy is looking cleaner. Noise pollution is down in a lot of places. So I do think there's opportunity, but we have to seize that, right? Like we can't just say, oh, wow, that's great, that's interesting. Well, we do things backwards, or we do things the wrong way. And then once we do pass this crisis, just go back to doing back to business as usual, So I think you kind of touched on that a little bit in that last segment. And I wonder if you had anything else on that. I mean, I know that extends a little beyond county commission, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's some local aspect of that that I'm not thinking of that you have thought of.
Well, I think it speaks to how it's all interconnected again, you know.
Right.
There's this Eduardo Galeano quote that I really love that probably a lot of people have already heard me use in some other context before, but one eye on the microscope and one eye on the telescope, you know. And so I think we look at what we can do here and now in our lives and in our community, while also looking at the impacts that's going to have more broadly geographically and also on a longer timeline. Something I keep finding myself doing in the moments I like take a moment of pause, you know, is like how this is a chance for many of us who aren't like currently sick or something to take a deep breath. And in a way, the planet is kind of taking a deep breath by not breathing in so much CO2. But it's been fascinating to me to see how, like, personally, I'm kind of operating on this like high level anxiety on a day-to-day basis, you know, like trying to work with folks who I work with at Nucci Space on like how to help with the economic impact for a lot of these most vulnerable people that you're talking about. Of course, we have a limited scope with how we're trying to focus that, and then working with folks in the community that we know, you know, who are trying to respond collectively to this through mutual aid networks outside the government and also to influence the government's decisions. And it's really hard to think of this as like a moment to pause and reflect at all. But like the daily machinations that we're usually wrapped up in are slowing and pausing around us anyway. So sort of like there's this like filling up of urgency that we feel internally while things around us are kind of slowing down. It's sort of bizarre in that way.
I've experienced that too myself.
And I'm seeing like a bunch of questions from folks, so I do want to get to those in a second. But I think I do want to speak to the privilege thing you brought up, which is that like those of us who aren't currently sick have a privilege over anyone who is. Those of us who have a shelter we generally live in day to day have a privilege over people who don't. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us to recognize that and think about what we can do, not only like right now, but what that means about what we can and maybe should do after this. And I think this poses some pretty big questions on fundamental things like how our capitalist economy measures people's deservingness of housing and food and shelter and medicine and things like that. And how, but it also brings to mind that like we have this privilege collectively to live in an era where there is food abundance, where we don't suffer from famine and things in the way we used to, where we can say things like housing and healthcare are a human right because there's already enough buildings there, there's already medicine developed. And so the question is really about distribution. And I think there's a lot we can do both on the local level in our communities and with the local government to reimagine and actually transform how things are distributed and to whom and why. I'll try to take these in order. What are some things that you want to do to combat the huge levels of income and wealth inequality in Athens? I guess that dovetails with that one.
Hey, Jesse.
Yeah.
Do you mind naming off who the questions from?
That was from Adam Lasla.
Okay.
Yeah. So before he was sharing one from Brianna, now this one's from him himself.
Oh, gotcha.
Huge levels of income and wealth inequality. I'm going to avoid getting too policy wonky here and just say in short that I think it comes down to what we hold center day to day. And so when we're responding to proposals, developments, policies, we're thinking about the people who are living in this financial precarity that we're discussing in this conversation here, that we're thinking about the people who are lacking resources already. I'm glad that Adam's talking about inequality, because we talk a lot about the 38% poverty rate here over and over again. It's become like a talking point for everybody, and I'm sick of it being a talking point. In large part because we're not really a poor community. It's just that wealth, that access to resources isn't distributed. So the local government's limited in its powers to do some of that redistribution, but I think we can look at ways to leverage fees, especially when it comes from large institutions like the university, to pay their fair share. I think we can also take the existing infrastructure we have for things like the Economic Development Department and change their mandate so that they're focusing on businesses of a certain type and businesses that adhere to certain, as you might call them, protocols. So living wages and better HR policies for their workers, more worker empowerment, and that they're also tasked with not just job creation, but creating jobs for people who already live in Athens. And yeah, again, I'll avoid the super details of what those HR policies are and things for maybe another time, unless someone wants to hear them right now. But I think the short version is what and who do we hold center in the policies we make, as well as the decisions we make responding to proposals. And if we're being proactive about the policies we make, then we'll have better things to respond to on the Mayor and Commissioner's agenda. Stephen asked, you touched on this earlier, but can you talk more about the future implications of policy made during a crisis? So yeah, I guess, we make policies in a crisis to respond to the immediate need. And I think in a lot of ways, it really reveals the blind spots we may have. So I saw this play out in the Mayor Commission meeting earlier this week, the special called session they had that they're now following up on tonight. And it started, I'm really grateful for Russell being the one who led the charge on getting it on the Mayor and Commission's agenda and forcing the meeting to happen. I think that was really important and really good work. But then the way he was approaching it included being really not only assertive, kind of aggressive about the need, but it was revealing in some of the things he would say, well, what's missing from this list? Why are we not why are we not doing this right now? We need to do it. And the feedback he was getting from people was not, oh, we don't think this is necessary. It was from people like Ovita saying, well, I'm worried about who's going to be most impacted by this. Because if you have a curfew in place that says people can't be in public, but then people who live in public space because they don't have anywhere else to go right now are going to be automatically out of compliance. And, when we talk about closing businesses, forcing them to shutter their doors or completely change their business model to respond to this, usually people talk about the impact that's going to have on the business, and we think of the business owners maybe, and their ability to stay afloat and reopen their doors for regular business later. And there's not enough conversation about the workers. And usually when things get redistributed, it's through that entity, that business entity, or through some other mechanism like a tax break, or maybe we do get some kind of weird Andrew Yang style one-off UBI from Trump or something, and we all get a $1,000 check, but that'll be based on whether we file the W-2. And so there's all these people that always fall through the cracks. And I think the opportunity right now is to see the cracks much more clearly. And then I think really the best way to make policy short term is to be doing it with the long term in mind, so that we're not only exposing those cracks, but actually narrowing or eliminating them, so that there aren't cracks for people to keep falling into. I feel like this conversation is getting a lot more theoretical than I usually like to get when I talk commission. I usually want to talk about and so that's why we need this living wage, or that's why we need this HR policy for a just cause clause.
That's what makes it so fun when you go live, is you have no idea where it's going to go.
Yeah. What can we do for people? This is from Felix Bell. What can we do for people trapped with their abusers, people who will be trapped with them? How can I make them feel heard right now?
Wow.
Oof.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Trapped is a word that touches a nerve with me. That's I mean, for folks who don't know, I've had like a long history of struggling with depression. And usually the word I go to when I'm deep in it is trapped. And I've known many people in situations like the one that Felix is describing. And this again sort of reveals that like that situation that Felix is describing is one that exists before COVID-19 was something any of us had thought or heard of. I see there's a follow-up. It says, and how can I help myself remember that we can't make anyone feel anything ever, even ourselves? Yeah, I'm glad that their follow-up was there with that comment, because we can't make people feel heard or make people feel anything, but we can choose to listen, and I think we can choose to respond. We all have kind of a range of both like how much capacity do we have to listen, and that varies depending on our own context. And we also have a range of how much we can do and how we can respond, given our means, our knowledge, our connection with that person or those people that we're talking about. I think one of the biggest things we can do for people who are really struggling is find a way to connect with them, which is of course extra weird right now because we're doing it mostly through phone and internet, and to really reach out to listen. I think a lot of it for me comes down to questions. What kind of questions do we ask people? And trying to ask questions that are as open-ended as possible. And then doing our best to, even though we might be like, well, there's this shelter, there's this resource, blah, 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 like trying to ask questions that will help someone arrive at a place where they want to ask questions of you, and then I think you can present possible ways forward. So yeah, I think starting from a place of questions is the simplest and easiest way for someone to feel heard, because you're literally inviting them to share. And then yeah, I mean, if Felix is still there and wants to follow up, I guess I'm curious if you're looking for something more substantive that you think the community can or should be doing, or if you have ideas about what we can or should be doing. It is, yeah, it's, sorry, I'm just kind of getting caught up in this like weight of thinking of people who are not only feeling like the isolation that any of us are kind of tapping into right now, but who are like sitting in a place where they might not feel safe, and like how to find a way out. For people who are, if there are people who don't know, there are resources like Project Safe in the Cottage that can offer people a place to go and to stay. And again, maybe this current shared crisis emergency situation we're in will help reveal the need for us to have more of those sorts of resources available to people. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it really just comes down to listening and then following up and following through. Don't promise more than you can do, but follow through on the things you say you're going to do. So if you listen to someone and you think that you have it in you to be able to check in with them again the next day or to stay on the phone overnight, then offer that and be sure to follow through. And also, I think maybe the last thing I want to share on that is that the way we get through anything best, I think the way we build resilience individually and as communities is to share. So it's not just sharing our experience, but also sharing the work. So if someone reaches out to you and they're having a hard time, or you reach out to someone who you think they're having a hard time, finding a way to share that not only with them, but also with someone else that you, or ideally both of you, know. I think that's how we build these mutual aid networks that like happen more organically and personally.
Great. And just to give you kind of a heads up, we're looking like we're about 12 minutes out from the commission meeting starting.
Yeah.
So if you want to get close to wrapping up so folks can direct their attention to that, it would probably be beneficial.
Yeah, so maybe we'll cap it at another 10 minutes, maybe a bit less than that, and then people can migrate over.
Yeah.
The main commission meeting starts at 6. It'll be live streamed like they all are now, thankfully. And shout out to Mariah Parker for pushing for all the meetings to be recorded and broadcast. And succeeding. Yeah, there was a push in the community level for that for quite some time, but it took Mariah Parker getting in office for it to finally happen. So grateful for that. That was before all the rest of the progressive wave got elected. So. Where was I with that? So that meeting starts at 6. They have 3 agenda items. The first one is about the airport. If you're concerned about how the SPLOST project for the airport is going to get passed, then be sure to get there right on time. If you're not super concerned about that, then you can probably tune in 5 minutes late and not miss what you're mostly there for, which is the coronavirus response stuff. Did you have anything else for me, Gabe, or does anybody else have anything else they want to ask or share? It feels the weirdest thing for me in all this is how one-sided it is that I'm just talking a lot, and occasionally I just get text from someone.
Yeah. It's okay though. I think I've been thinking about this a lot the past couple of days, just how important leadership is right now, how important courage is right now. And I think a lot of people are kind of looking for that. So I can't think of anyone more perfect to demonstrate those qualities than someone who's already demonstrated that, at least for as long as I've known you. And also someone who is, again, vying to be an actually elected leader in this community. So I think something like this is a perfect venue for the circumstances that we're dealing with. And I can say I appreciate you doing this, as well as everyone else who's watching probably appreciates it as well.
Well, thanks, Gabe. You're always you're never short on flattery. I mean in earnest that my background is definitely in a lot of activists and community organizing work that centers in among other ideas, the idea that being leaderless is leaderful, or in sharing power. And so I think when we're looking for leaders, as corny as it might sound, I think it really means to look within ourselves. And there's this funny way that humility can sometimes take the form of self-denial and self-deprecation, and it's so easy for us to belittle the ways that we step up for people in our lives on a daily basis, that we all do. We're all a mix of leader and follower. And
for sure.
One of my favorite phrases that most people listening have probably heard is this idea of step up, step back. And so when and how we choose to step up and step back, I think part of that's recognizing how we already do that, and then trying to think on how we can maybe creatively shake it up a bit more. I've been blown away, years and years of doing outreach, canvassing, organizing work locally and kind of around the country, how much everybody's really doing a lot. There's just still so much to do, It's easy for us to take for granted that we have running water and functioning sewer, and to then get passionate about who needs that infrastructure improved, so that they're not lead pipes poisoning people. It's easy for us to take for granted that we have antibiotics and fever reducers that we can go get from the store generally if we have $2 to buy the generic bottle of Tylenol or whatever. I think it's easy to forget that all that stuff is not just the product of collective ingenuity, but literally there's hundreds, thousands, in some cases of millions of people involved in getting that water to come out of your tap, or that bottle of fever reducer to be available to you. And I think there's this myth that lives in the consciousness of a lot of people that our society is full of people who are apathetic or sheeple or something like that. And I actually don't think that's the case. I think most people are trying and in many ways succeeding at doing a lot. It's just that there's always more to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my very long-winded response to your compliment to me, trying to be like mirrored back and say like I think we're all doing a lot all the time, and it's important for us to recognize what we're already doing.
Yeah, and I think more than ever right now it's important for us to be kind of offering that support to each other, even if it is from a distance, if it's virtually. Because I know, like, I have so many friends I can count, and I'm very blessed for that, but these last few days I have felt probably more isolated than I ever have in my entire life. I mean, it's just yeah, I think it's just more the idea that you can't really go too far, you can't do the things, because really you're not as isolated as maybe we are. I don't know. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's probably more important for us now than ever to be interconnected and supportive and uplifting of one another. And that's something that transcends politics, you know. But I think doing things more events like this are going to be very beneficial for everyone as we all kind of collectively deal with this experience.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. The idea that this is like it feels more alone, even though we're not necessarily more alone than all kinds of periods in our lives. You know.
Right.
I had a really intense flu last year, and I was very sick, and I couldn't leave my bed for like 5 days. I was definitely more isolated then than I am these last few days, but this feels worse. In a lot, it just feels it's weirder. Weird is hard to deal with. I guess
there's no like specific timeline on it. Either. Like I can look at this date on the calendar and tell myself, oh, it's gonna be over that. You know, we don't even have that yet. So it's a little tough for sure. Are you looking forward to this meeting tonight? Watching this county commission meeting to see what comes of this?
I am, and I'm gonna sign off here in a minute so that we can, so that you and I, Gabe, can watch it, and hopefully others watching this can watch that if they want to. I definitely encourage you to if you live in Athens. There is a question from Megan that says, what is the plan for the campaign moving forward given this shelter in place? So the backbone of our campaign, this is for me running for commission here, was going to be door-to-door canvassing. And we've definitely had to recalibrate that plan a lot. So there's going to be a lot more online and phone engagement at the center. We're still operating under the idea that canvassing will become viable before the election, which is on May 19th. And so we want to continue to build a robust network of people who are ready to hit the streets and knock on doors if and when that is possible, which hopefully will happen before the end of April. But for now, there's a fair amount of data entry work that can be done. I just learned more today about how I can actually delegate that to people who don't have the same access to Vote Builder that I do, so that's good. But there's going to be a lot of phone banking and postcard writing. So if people want to help with that, with either making phone calls, if you feel comfortable talking to folks, and we can kind of give you a framework to work off of with the call and a voicemail script to leave for the majority of people you call who just send a voicemail. And then if people don't want to do as much of the on-the-fly conversing, but do want to help, there's thousands of people we want to send postcards to, and we like the idea of them being handwritten rather than just typed up. So we're going to get some printed that have like the backside to handwrite on, and people can handwrite notes to folks. So if people want to help with that, those are going to be our two big tasks in the coming weeks, and then canvassing will still be part of it hopefully thereafter, as well as some like yard sign distribution. And then I plan to do more of these, and also going to try to get on radio. If people continue to do live interviews on the radio, which I'm hoping some of the stations in town will do, then I want to do more of those. And the next one of these, thank you again, Gabe, for inspiring this. The next one of these is going to be this Saturday at 7, and I'll be with Mariah Parker. So Mariah Parker will be my online interlocutor, along with whoever else wants to tune in then to share more questions and thoughts. And in between now and then, you can reach me at jesseforathens@gmail.com, or shoot me a message on Facebook if you want. I prioritize email over Facebook, so I'm still not caught up on Facebook the way I need to be, but I'm doing what I can. Yeah.
I can attest to that. You just are not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, thank you so much, Gabe, for inspiring kitchen table chats. Our minor tweak on the campfire chats started way back with FDR and continued most recently with Bernie. And
Yes.
here from my kitchen table to wherever y'all are, thank you so much for tuning in. Much love and solidarity. You can watch this video after and share it with others if you missed the beginning. And yeah, tune in on Saturday at 7 p.m. Me and Mariah Parker are going to try take 2.